Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 496 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, gun violence is something that we talk about often on our show, given what's currently going on in our society, and especially as it impacts schools and colleges across the country. I've been in search of answers, and I know that our next guest is going to help us to better understand what's currently happening in our country and offer some solutions here on our show to help us protect our students. Jeff Wenninger is a nationally recognized law enforcement expert with 33 years of experience, most notably as lieutenant with the LAPD. He has dedicated his career to understanding and improving police practices, specializing in police use of force, crowd management and control, school and campus safety, and security protection measures. As the founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants, LLC, he provides clear and practical expert testimony and consulting services. He uses his extensive experience to help legal professionals, cities, schools, and more navigate the complexities of law enforcement in today's challenging environment. Jeff's goal is to boost public trust and safety by offering straightforward, actionable advice and ensuring objectivity in every assessment. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's my pleasure to have you on the show, and certainly very timely considering some of the things that are going on as I watch the news every single day. I'm a bit of a news junkie, so I'm paying attention to everything that's happening. Now, I want to go back to your undergraduate moment because I always think this is very telling. You decided on Kent State for your undergraduate experience. So why did you decide that Kent State was going to be the place for you?
Well, I was actually born and raised in Kent, Ohio, and my father is a professor at Kent State. He's a sociology professor. But I had initially started my collegiate career at Western Michigan. I was a hockey player. I was playing ice hockey there on scholarship. And during my first year, I made a decision to transfer to Kent and play ice hockey at Kent State in my hometown.
Nice, nice. So you're coming back home, right? So that's always really nice to come back home. So now I understand it. Being born there is great. And I've been to Western Michigan. It's a nice place, but there's nothing like coming home. We both know what that's like. Some home cooking is always good. Now, you worked for the LAPD for over 30 years, and you worked your way up all the way to lieutenant of the LAPD. Talk to us a little bit about what is the worst part of that job and what's the best part of that job?
Well, I'm an optimistic guy, so I'll start with the best part of the job. I think
Mhm.
the best part of the job at the LAPD was the exposure to the vast opportunities that they had as far as the different specialties that I could get myself exposed to. And while I was there, I was the officer in charge of the detective entity that investigated all officer-involved shootings and lethal force incidents. And prior to that, I wrote the rationale for Chief Bill Bratton as well as Charlie Beck that was submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners in regards to their adjudication of these force cases that we had quite a few of in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, that's really good stuff. Is there anything that was just like not good or something that you didn't look forward to as part of the job?
You know, really, what I'm doing now
Mhm.
was motivated by what I didn't like about the job. I found that law enforcement was quite insular and very resistant to change, to be responsive to making the changes necessary to best serve the communities in Los Angeles. And it's not just in Los Angeles, but it's nationwide. And as a result of that frustration, I've found that in my retirement, I actually have a broader scope of influence to affect some of that change that I felt that I was ran into a few brick walls trying to influence while I was on the job.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me because I'm also trying to, work with college fraternities and sororities and to make them better. And so I certainly understand that frustration. You see things that are wrong and you're like, you know what? I'm going to start a company to go and fix all of that stuff. And sometimes they are very resistant to change. Fraternities and sororities are over 100 years old. They've been doing the same thing the same way for a century. And they're like, well, we're successful, so why should we change our ways? And I'm like, well, things are different today than they were, let's say, in the 1980s. And so there's things like liability and things are changing. And I think we have to kind of go with that flow and recognize when we have to change, even when we've been doing something the same way for centuries. We got to look at it and say, does this still even make sense? Or are we just going to blindly move forward and just keep doing things the way that we've always done, which is really kind of one of the most dangerous terms in the English language, is just to blindly follow without asking why are we doing this. So I think that's really important. So we're very much aligned in that way. Now you're the founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants LLC. Here you provide expert witness testimony in police use of force. You consult on event security. I'm very concerned with school safety. I mean, I got two kids who are in college right now, and I need to make sure that they're going to come home in one piece. And recently at Appalachia High School in Georgia, two students and two teachers were killed in a school shooting. So, talk to our audience. What specific steps do we have to take as a nation in order to prevent something like this from happening again?
Well, in looking what occurred there, and quite frankly, consistently, time and time again, in all of these school shootings, the focus is primarily on hardening the target. And that really is not what the focus should be. Let's look at this. You have circumstance where if you have an AR-15, which is fully automatic, you can fire up to 600 rounds a minute.
Mhm.
If you have a 20-round magazine, you can fire 20 rounds in 2 seconds. So it's not about hardening the target, because even if it's a semi-automatic function, you can fire, depending on the individual and their competency, they can fire anywhere between 1 and 3 rounds per second. And the amount of carnage and death and injury that can be sustained in such a short period of time, it's not about hardening the target. It's about preventing these incidents from occurring. And we've fallen very, very far short in our assessments on how to do this. And it begins with behavioral assessments, wherein in this case, you have an individual that was identified last year who had made a threat on social media. And notifications were made. The local police did interviews, but it fell short because there was no follow-up. There was no follow-up where, in regards where you have the father who purchases an AR-15 for a Christmas present to this individual that had demonstrated suicidal and homicidal tendencies prior that year. So that's a breakdown. That's a breakdown in the entire system, with law enforcement, with the mental health system, with the school district, all of that. The communication is not occurring. So first and foremost, we need to bolster and enhance that behavioral assessment aspect and make sure that it's carried out. Secondarily, we really need to start focusing on what the empirical evidence suggests. And the empirical evidence suggests that what is going to most likely prevent these types of incidents from occurring is increased number of adult-child trusted relationships. And what we're oftentimes seeing with our school districts is they're not opening the schools and having programs where the community and family members and parents can actively play a role in the daily lives of their children at school. And oftentimes that's a result of, yes, there will always be parents that are difficult to manage, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to deal with them on individual basis, but not be resistant to implementing these programs that have demonstrated actually work. And then probably the third thing, which is the most controversial, is gun regulation, because it involves a Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sensitive to that. I understand that people have the right to bear arms, but let's look at the First Amendment. The First Amendment government has the ability to dictate the time, place, and manner in which you exercise your First Amendment rights. So it's not a blanket right. There's certain things you can't do. You can't yell fire in a movie theater.
Mhm.
So why can't we have reasonable and logical common sense regulation when it comes to guns? Because I don't think there's anybody that's going to argue whether you're pro Second Amendment or you want significant restraints on the access to guns. Nobody's going to argue we don't want an individual like this young man at 14 years old having an AR-15. And the empirical evidence is there. We can't argue it. So I'm a 33-year former law enforcement professional. I don't want these people having those guns in their hands either. So it just makes my life more difficult and more dangerous as a law enforcement professional. So those are the three actionable things that need to be focused on, and not worrying about putting school resource officers in schools. It doesn't work. If the empirical evidence suggests that when they're present, 3 times as many people are killed than when they're not. That was a study that was done between 1980 and 2019 on all the incidents. So it just is not the direction we need to be going in. But that, for some reason, that's when you look at after the shooting, you watch the news, and that's what everybody's talking about: hardening the target, hardening the target.
Mhm.
We need to prevent these from occurring.
I agree
If
with
we're
you.
responding, it's too late. We have failed.
Yeah, I agree with you. By the time you get a chance to respond as a law enforcement professional, it's already too late. You already have dead students or teachers, and this is a major problem. And politically, you're right. We're in this political season. All I hear when I turn on the news is we have to harden the target. I'm sorry, but the AR-15 can cause damage that a hardened target is not going to be able to help. And we both know it. And so, thank you as a law enforcement professional of over 30 years, just for bringing some clarity and some transparency to this issue. And I think that's a brave thing, and we need to hear more people like you with that experience to help us figure this out, so that way we don't lose more lives. It's just, I mean, I'm just sick and tired of hearing about it on the news. It's got to stop, and I think these common sense gun laws certainly makes total sense to me. I'm in favor of the Second Amendment, but we have to have some common sense gun laws and regulations. I mean, we have to. We absolutely have to. And just look at any other country anywhere in the world, and you'll see that we have a problem, and we have to admit that. First step is saying that we have a problem. I think that's
Right.
step number one.
And listen, I'm not a guy that just did 33 years on the job. I
mm,
worked Metropolitan Division, which was our SWAT and our canine, special forces essentially of the department. Um, Back when I was an officer, when Columbine happened, and we sent SWAT personnel to Columbine to study that. And they devised what is currently used for police response. It's called immediate action rapid deployment tactics. And I taught those tactics to LAPD officers. And then 4 months after Columbine, I was part of a tactical team that went into the North Valley Jewish Center, which was an elementary school where 5 people were shot by an individual with an Uzi who fired 70 rounds. So I've been there. I've stepped into those locations. I've gone in after shooters where you see blood and carnage and chaos. And then I was the officer in charge of the detective entity that investigated these mass shootings, most notably the one that occurred at LAX back in 2011, where there was a federal agent that was killed. So I've seen these types of things through the lens of 3 different positions: being a tactician and teaching it, and investigating it. And I get it. I know what needs to be done. And it's frustrating. You asked me what bothers me about law enforcement or was troubling: the fact that we haven't figured this out.
mm. Amen. Amen, brother. And I'm also very worried about this highly charged political climate that we have. Recently, we had a former president of the United States running for election who was shot in Pennsylvania at a rally. How does something like this happen with such a figure who should be so well protected? And whether we agree with his politics or not really doesn't matter. We can't let this happen to either party. So how does this happen?
The one thing that I found that was very frustrating was people wanted to bring in the DEI and that there's a lower standards, and I don't buy that at all. I commend those Secret Service agents that went up there on stage and surrounded the former president. Outstanding job. What ultimately happened here was it was a breakdown of standards over a period of time. Now, listen, back when I worked Metropolitan Division, one of our functions was anytime the president, vice president, first lady, or any head of state came to the city of Los Angeles, we worked with the Secret Service or the State Department, depending on who the person was. And we provided the dignitary protection detail. So I've worked with the Secret Service, and by and large, generally quite impressed with them. So I know that they have the blueprint to appropriately deploy on a protective detail. And what occurred was they didn't do what they know they're supposed to be doing. It's what I call is the knowing doing gap. They know what they should have been doing, but they didn't do it. And what this was is that over time, the standards in cutting corners had become the norm versus doing what they knew they were supposed to be doing. And they'd really just actually gotten lucky up to this point, would be my assessment. And that it rose to the level of negligence. When you had an individual that was able to gain access to a roof that was as close as it was, it's inexplicable. And I accept the fact that we may have had personnel challenges as far as resources. Well, you still have to find a way to cover those threats that aren't going to be covered by an actual personnel resource. So why wasn't technology used? Drones being flown, a helicopter at high levels. It's just inexplicable to me. Someone that has done this and worked on these plans and implemented these plans to protect people as important as the President of the United States, I can't explain the deficiencies that occurred. But I believe that it occurred because it was allowed to occur, and that had become the norm.
That's very sad to hear because, yeah, I looked at it the same way. I said, this is just a failure. There's just no other way around this. We have technology that can figure this out, and it wasn't used, or we just ignored it. So either way, it's just a failure. The other thing too is I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so Kentucky is very close to me. We had a recent fugitive suspect on I-75. This guy is opening fire on a highway over the weekend. Is this, I mean, I've never heard of anything like this where we have daytime snipers that are shooting over a highway at random cars. I mean, what should we make of all of this?
Well, we saw it back, I think it was 2002 in DC. We had a number of months where we had those two individuals that were shooting at vehicles on freeways. And then I think it was maybe a year later, we had the same type of thing going on here in the state of Ohio. And I think it was just earlier this month in Seattle, there was something similar. And that person, I believe was just taken into custody this morning.
Wow.
So it's not unusual. However, it's not all that frequent that we see something like that. But what we are seeing is an unbelievable explosion of gun violence on the freeways, not necessarily by snipers, but by the drivers. And that, by and large, can be attributed perhaps to the large influx of the purchase of firearms during COVID. But in analyzing the evidence, it goes back to gun control. When you look at the states that had the most incidents of freeway violence, you're seeing it in the states that have very limited or no restrictions on concealed carry. You have like New Mexico, Arizona, I believe actually Tennessee is one of them, and Oklahoma. It's like they have like 8% of the population in the United States, but you can attribute over 20% of the freeway violence to those states. And then when you comparatively look in the Northeast, take the states in the Northeast of the country that have the most restrictive gun laws, they don't have this problem. It's not a coincidence that that's the case. There needs to be things done. We need to model those states. New York's one of them. New York does not have these problems.
Mhm.
However, New York is a heavily populated and one would even say violent state. But they're not at the top of the list on this stuff. They do quite well. And it's because of their laws. And until we're ready to model that, we're never going to make the improvements as a nation to address the gun violence that we have. And it gets really, really exhausting when people say, well, the gun didn't fire itself. It's the people, not the guns. Well, a lot of domestic violence homicides can be avoided if people didn't have access immediately to a firearm. And given that ability to immediately act out in a violent way, often ends tragically. And if you didn't have that access, perhaps you wouldn't have that issue.
Mhm.
So it's something that we need to address as a nation, not only as the citizens of this nation, but our elected officials need to address this, and they need to address it in a timely manner.
I agree. We have to look at this objectively, and we have to connect all the dots. You've clearly started connecting the dots, states that have very aggressive gun laws, others that don't. And you've clearly been able to articulate that. I think we just need to be objective and look at the data, and the data will point towards a solution. And so, I'm also, I speak on university campuses every single week. So my concern is certainly with college students. In your experience, how well are universities adapting to this growing concern over active shooter scenarios? And do you feel that the current safety protocols are adequate?
When you look at the universities, the first real mass shooting on universities was in 1966, the University of Texas in Austin.
Mhm.
And to include that shooting, there's been a total of 13 since 1966. And that one actually occurred a couple months before I was born. So universities are doing something right, comparatively speaking, when you look at school shootings K through 12. I think we've had, since Columbine, there's been 417, I believe.
Mhm.
And so universities are doing something right. But they're still a reflection of our society, and they are exposed. But they tend to be more open to critical thinking and being objective to solutions and using research and empirical evidence to direct their policies that they implement to protect students. Now, it'll never be perfect, because I was a resident staff advisor when I was in college. So I was very well aware of the trends and what was occurring in regards to violence on campus. And, what struck me and what I was most concerned about was, sexual assaults and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But by and large, schools tend to do a better job because of their acceptance and objectiveness of the data which drives their policies. And they're very conscious of mental health related issues. Because let's be honest, it's all about mental health, and it's all about gun control.
Mhm.
That's what this is about.
Mhm.
And we as society, if we do better managing those two things, we'll be able to turn this thing around. This is unique. This is unique to the United States. You don't see this sort of stuff elsewhere. And so we need to accept that and be committed to doing the things that need to be done. And it's uncomfortable for people that have certain ideologies. But at the end of the day, there's the only right that we all really have is to live our lives in peace and not in fear. That is the right that we all really have, above and beyond any right that anybody wants to assert as more important. It isn't. And like I said, I'm committed to continuing to pound this drum and getting as many people to listen as possible, because you can't argue. It's not my opinion. This isn't my opinion. It's supported by evidence,
Well said.
empirical.
I will certainly help you to amplify that voice any way that I can. And I never really thought about it looking at the K to 12 incidents versus college campus incidents. And why is that? And perhaps that college campuses are just more open to mental health conversations and looking at the data, looking at the empirical data and letting that to drive their decision making. And perhaps that is why we see that it's doing better comparatively speaking. So really interesting thoughts. What are your thoughts on allowing students and the staff on college campuses to carry firearms as a means of defense?
I am not a fan whatsoever. With my background investigating officer-involved shootings,
Hmm.
law enforcement officers get a significant amount of training relative to firearms and marksmanship. And the hit rates are very low. They're surprisingly low, lower than law enforcement would probably want to admit. So, like here in the state of Ohio, where I live now, the school districts can allow, they're leaving it up to the school districts to allow teachers to carry guns with 24 hours of training. That, quite frankly, I find that an insult to the profession that I dedicated 33 years to. Are you kidding me? Do you think that 24 hours of training with a firearms is going to make you proficient under dire stress and circumstances of a critical incident of an active shooter? Let me tell you, the most highly trained personnel have a difficult time managing those circumstances. So all you're going to be doing is creating a situation where the chaos is just going to escalate. We have to remember, and even as a police officer, when you're off duty, if you choose to carry a firearm and take action in a certain type of circumstance, you have to realize you don't have a bulletproof vest, you don't have a radio, you don't have anything to identify you as a police officer, and all these sorts of circumstances that all have to be considered relative to whether you take action or not. So putting guns in the hands of teachers that their responsibility is to teach our children, and that is what their backgrounds and education is, and that's what they're trained to do. To put a firearm in their hands, it's just going to create more chaos and more problems and probably more deaths, to be honest, when these incidents do occur. It's all about not hardening the target. It's about preventing these from occurring.
I
And
appreciate
when
that
I
answer.
was in California, I started in my son's elementary school. It's called Watchdogs, Dads of Great Students. And basically what it was is a volunteerism program where it's nationally recognized and provided training. But you didn't have to be a dad. You could be a mom, a grandfather, grandmother, aunt, uncle, concerned citizen, a retiree. But you volunteer at the school. You're there for school drop-off, school pickup. You're there in the hallways, recess, lunch. And you're there creating relationships with these students because by and large, if you look at the data, it's all about the data. That with these shooters, by and large, have planned. 93% of their incidents they have planned. And in 4 out of 5 of them, they have made reference to their intent. And somebody knows that they're a threat or they're a risk or something's not right. And we need to create an environment where these students feel comfortable coming forward and sharing what they know so we can take the appropriate actions to divert and prevent these things from occurring. But we don't do that. I tried to implement that in my hometown here and they weren't interested. And I was shocked because I had done it before and I wanted to do it again because I have a son who's 13 years old and he's at that age that it's important that we address bullying and children's emotional well-being because that is what's going to play out down the road. And listen, COVID has impacted our children in a very negative way, where socially they still struggle. From what I see as a volunteer crossing guard in my hometown here in Ohio, these children are victims of bullying. And it's bullying that creates these issues down the road. These kids are bullied, they're isolated, and then they act out in a very violent way. And how are we identifying these children? We're not doing a very good job of it. And how are we creating these relationships, student to children relationships, where the child feels comfortable telling somebody, hey, I heard him say this, I heard this, or We need to foster that, and we still don't get it. We want to put up bulletproof glass. We want to put up, metal detectors, all of that stuff. That's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, this is a really tough issue, and I think you're right. I think we need to open up conversation. Certainly, that didn't happen at Appalachian High School in Georgia. It seems to be that there was some evidence that this kid was troubled and was talking about a school shooting, and people knew it. And we have to create that environment that people feel comfortable in coming forward and asking for help. I mean, it's the same thing as we tackle hazing in college fraternities and sororities. We have to create that environment that people feel empowered to reach out and ask for help, but as long as they feel like they don't want to reach out for help because they're afraid that their organization is going to be punished or the entire fraternity and sorority community is going to be punished and they're all going to lose their standing on campus, why would they come forward? They're just going to clam up and not say a thing because they know what the ramifications are. They're going to get in trouble. So yeah, we have to create that open environment where people feel comfortable to come forward with this information. The last question that I wanted to ask is just on behalf of the college students, how do they engage in advocacy efforts to promote both gun safety and also mental health awareness on their college campuses?
Well, listen, it really begins with training. First and foremost, in the event that something occurs, they need to know what to do. And they also need to know what to do in the event that they hear something or become aware of a potential threat. They need to know what to do, because it's so easy to just turn a blind eye and do nothing if you don't know what it is you actually are supposed to do or what the chain of communication should be. So it's about that. And then secondarily, you really have to advocate with the universities to have their policies reflective of what is in the best interest of the student's safety. And that is the stuff about mental illness and gun regulation, like no gun zones, safe gun zones, advocacy for opportunity for students to get mental health without having any type of stigma attached to them, have services provided to them. It's very important. And they're a voting age at 18. Let's be honest. Your votes are very powerful. You need to advocate through your vote of people running for office that actually want to take affirmative measures to improve the safety for not only our K through 12, but at our universities and as society as a whole. And until you find people that are courageous enough to do that, we're going to be at odds. But that's probably the absolute most powerful thing that a university student has. Know who you're voting for and vote for those people that have your best interests in mind and aren't going to be swayed by, the money associated with the right to bear arms and, all that stuff. So that's the best thing you can do.
Really good advice. I like that. And it's a good place to leave it as we start getting really close to this election. I think, knowing your candidates both nationally and locally to make sure that they're aligned to help fix this gun violence situation that we have in this country, I think is super important. So thank you for sharing all that. Now, we do love good food here. That's my weakness, is really good food. And I know that law enforcement professionals always know the greatest spots in a particular city to get great food. I mean, if you want a good recommendation, talk to a law enforcement professional. He knows where the best food is in town. So the next time I'm in Cleveland, where should I be going for a great meal?
Listen, I love Italian food, and Little Italy, Valario's and Little Italy is outstanding. It's at 12405 Mayfield Road in Little Italy.
I
I
knew
know
I was asking
exactly
the
where
right
it is.
guy.
I can get there with my eyes closed. Nothing like the homemade pasta and a great bottle of wine. Great environment, wonderful place.
I love it. Jeff doesn't need GPS. He just puts his head out the window and he'll make his way there just based on how good the food smells. He can make his
Yep.
way to the restaurant in no time. It's on muscle memory. He knows how to get there. No problem.
Yeah, it's true.
I love it.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I love it. All right. So if our student listeners or if college administrators, really importantly, if they need consulting around active shooter trainings or other consulting on school safety, where can they go in order to connect with you?
Best way is to go to LinkedIn. You can put in Jeff Wenninger, it's Jeff, and my last name, Wenninger, or you could put law enforcement consultants, and it will take you to a booking page where you can be connected with me and we can schedule a 30 or 60-minute consult.
That would be great. To all of the college campuses that are listening right now to my words, reach out to Jeff, reach him on LinkedIn. That's how I connected with him and set up that consulting appointment with him so that way he can help you out just based on his experience and based on his just brutal honesty about where we are right now in terms of campus safety. I know that he can help you. And so please reach out to him. I think it's really important for all of our children, my children, for Jeff's children, for everybody's children, that we make our campuses a safer place. So, Jeff, I appreciate what you do. Thank you for all of your dedication on this particular topic, and I wish you nothing but the best. So, thank you so much for your work.
No, thank you.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
And yeah, of course. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Jeff and you want to make a difference in terms of campus safety, I want you to like this on social media. I want you to share it with other students and other campus administrators as it relates to campus safety. And we will see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.